Hello, this is for my U.S. History 1 students, still looking at the Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution. We're going to be looking at the, this will be a two-part, maybe even a three-part concept. Kind of important to understand the Constitution, since we peg a lot of our identity to it. It has a lot of consequences in our everyday lives, so we're going to really dive into this. What we're going to do today is look at the weaknesses and then look at how the Constitution overcame these weaknesses. Move this down here. There we go. The first weakness is the Articles of Confederation had no executive branch. So Congress under the Articles could make all the laws it wanted to, but it had no way to enforce them. It had to depend on the states to serve as the executive branch. In other words. The second was that there was no judiciary branch to settle disputes between the states, between states and the central government, or to protect the rights of individual citizens. So it had no high court, no Supreme Court. Next, the government under the Articles of Confederation did not have the ability to regulate the economy in order to bring financial stability to the country. During this time period, there were at least two important areas where Congress needed to control. One, Congress needed the ability to regulate the money supply. It needed to be able to control the amount of money and the value of money it printed out. And two, it needed the ability to raise money by having control over taxation. So under the Articles, the states could print their own money and determine the value of other money used within its borders. So complete chaos within the currency system within this new country called the United States of America. At the time, the central government could levy no taxes on individuals or upon states as well. And then Congress needed the ability to regulate interstate trade and trade between the states and foreign countries. It didn't have that ability also. The fourth weakness was it was inflexible. It could not adjust to the needs of the people in the states. The Articles were impossible to amend because it took a unanimous consent of the states and to make any modifications. The last weakness of the Articles is it did not provide a Bill of Rights. It was argued at the time that, well, since states have a Bill of Rights, each state's constitution had a Bill of Rights, why should the national government have a Bill of Rights? It would just be a redundancy. But it didn't have a Bill of Rights. Either with the modern Constitution when it was first thrown out to the states, but that would change later as well once they put it out to the states regularly. We'll talk about more later. So, because of the instability of the government under the Articles of Confederation to regulate and stabilize society, economically, socially, and politically, absolute chaos broke out within the states. This made the states realize the need for a stronger government, and therefore our present-day Constitution would be created. But in order to just demonstrate this result, it's necessary to discuss the post-war economy and show how the government under the Articles accomplished little in the way of stabilizing society. So although the war for independence freed American trade from the restrictions of the British imperial system, this freedom did not prove too profitable in the years immediately after the war. In England, after the war, a controversy broke out over the position of the former colonies in the British imperial system, as you could imagine. Unfortunately for the new American states, England would find it difficult to be friendly, and in 1784, Parliament voted to try building up exports to America while holding imports to a minimum. So they're going to basically flood the market, in other words, through legislative means. This attitude hurt American interests severely. In the southern states, the termination of royal bounties hit North Carolina producers of naval stores and South Carolina indigo planters hard. And a new English duty on rice reduced the exports that produced of that product by almost 50%. The British orders in Council of 1783 struck hard at the northern states when it barred American cured meat, fish, and dairy products from the British West Indies and permitted other American products to enter the island only in British ships. At the same time, British merchants eager to regain markets closed to them during the War for Independence poured low-priced manufactured goods of all kind into the American market. The net effect of this policy in 1784 to 385 was an imbalance in trade, with imports equaling to $6 million and exports to $1.7 million. So the market was flooded with cheap British goods. The unfavorable trade balance also resulted in a constant shortage of hard money into the new states. Gold and silver tended to flow to Europe to pay interest on loans and to purchase manufacturing goods, and the influx of English goods aggravated the American economy, which was suffering a post-war depression. So this situation developed because the Congress, under the Articles, was unable to control foreign trade by limiting imports or forcing the British to open the West Indies to unrestricted American trade. When individual states erected tariff barriers, English merchants easily got around them by bringing their own goods to other states that did not erect tariff barriers. The central government's lack of power to control commerce thus proved a major weakness in providing stability within society. An earlier movement in 1781 to solve this problem by giving the new central government under the Articles the power to tax imports would fail. At the same time, Congress under the Articles sought authority to levy a 5% tariff duty. The measure required unanimous a unanimous vote. The lack of flexibility that required a unanimous consent before any major change could be made to the Articles was recognized as a problem and would need to be addressed, right? So you're not going to get all 13 states agreeing to one law ever, especially a tariff law. You know, there's going to be one or two states that are going to disagree with this. So other attempts by Congress were also going to fail. In January of 1785, Congress appointed a committee headed by James Madison to try to persuade the individual states to grant it the power to regulate foreign commerce, but it failed. In 1786, the Virginia Assembly issued an invitation to the power to other 12 states to attend a commercial conference at Annapolis for September of that year. When only 5 states attended, they basically canceled it. There weren't enough for a conference. The seeds of the Constitutional Convention come about as a result of this, though, as a result of trying to get the Articles to have a little bit more power through Alexander Hamilton. He proposed that in May of 1787 that all the states should meet up to discuss commercial reforms and to give the central government a little bit more authority. So that would be the seeds of it. Not quite getting to the new Constitution, but the seeds of it are arising. So a depression developed in the new states after the war. In 1784, whole prices which were inflated during the war dropped rapidly, and farm produce was a glut on the market, owing to the stoppage of the West Indies trade. The inability of the government under the Articles to pay its debts undermined confidence and caused grave hardship for veterans and other dependents on the new government. So thus, the central government's inability to raise money to pay its debts and thereby create a machine which would allow it to direct the affairs of the country was a serious weaknesses that also needed to be overcome. So also the Depression made the states stingier than ever about meeting the financial requests of the central government. So this is going to lead straight to rebellions. When the central government needed money from the states, it had to ask for its requests called requisitions. If a state refused to pay the requisition for some reason, like New Jersey did in February of 1786, the government was powerless to do anything about it. Thus, the central government's inability to enforce its law or decisions is considered another major weakness under the Articles of Confederation. So this is all going to lead to Shays' Rebellion. So I'm going to direct you, the next link under this.
To put together an army.
One thing that the commercial elite did was to create a mercenary army to go against the rebels. General Benjamin Lincoln was a large land speculator from Boston, and what he did was went around to his friends, 129 of them, and raised a tremendous amount of money for a standing army. 4,400 men would march against the rebels.
On January 20th, 1787, Lincoln's army trudged west in deep snows and freezing temperatures to do battle with Shays.
So to pick up from the film, by the end of 1786, mobs of farmers under the leadership of Captain Daniel Shays began forcibly to prevent the county courts from sitting. The object of the leaders appear to have been to prevent further judgment for debt, quite obviously, pending the next state election. They met with stout resistance from state government. The mobs were ordered to disperse. The leaders declared outlaws, and the price was placed upon their heads. So Shays and his comrades then resolved to become rebels and threatened to besiege the state government. By the 2,000 rebels led by Shays and Luke Day lacked firearms, and their attempt to capture the federal arsenal at Springfield in February of 1787 was repulsed. Shays' rebellion had a great influence on public opinion. Consequently, state governments acted with notable wisdom and mercy, and eventually pardoned all the rebels, and even Shays. They didn't really... basically, they didn't want to turn Daniel Shays into a martyr across the states at this point, because most people were faced with the situation that Massachusetts farmers were faced with, and so again, all of them were pardoned, and Shays' Rebellion was over once all the ringleaders were captured. But Shays' Rebellion shocked the conservatives throughout the nation. So George Washington was said to have been deeply troubled by the news of the uprising and feared that such a disorder was the natural consequences of excessive democracy, and he was not alone in his fears. So this is going to be a great concern to the so-called founding fathers as they are beginning to convene in Philadelphia in 1787. So this is being squelched just at the same point that you're having the boys going to Philadelphia for what will become the Constitutional Convention. They're just there, at first, they think, to make some necessary reforms to the Articles of Confederation, but as it turns out, they'll scrap the whole thing and come up with the modern-day Constitution. But some of the concerns about... So Shays' Rebellion is going to really, really convince most people who have any kind of say or influence that a stronger central government is needed. And so what Shays' Rebellion reminded people like, well, James Madison, this quote that you see is in front of you is a James Madison quote. The most comparable and endurable source of faction has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interest in society. The first object of government is the protection of different and unequal faculties for acquiring property. So Madison will be one of the biggest influences in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. He's considered the father of the Constitution. Is greatly going to be concerned about what happened in Shays' rebellion and various other minor rebellions that are happening all over the country as a result of the post-war depression and the failings of the Articles of Confederation to address that. Further concern, Alexander Hamilton, in considering and reflecting back on Shays' rebellion, and considering about what people were talking about when it came to certain liberties and who those applied to, said the following: all communities divide themselves into the few and the many. The first are the rich and the well-born. The others, the mass of the people. The voice of the people has been said to be the voice of God. And however generally this maxim has been quoted and believed, it is not true in fact. The people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right. Give, therefore, the first class a distinct and permanent share in the government. Can a democratic assembly who annually revolve in the mass of the people be supposed to steadily pursue the public good? Nothing but a permanent body can check the imprudence of democracy. So, this is the sentiment that they're going in. Basically, the genie has been let out of the bottle with the rhetoric of the American Revolution and the experience people have went through, especially within the landed frontier, and the expectation of opportunity and the dismantling or the challenge of British hierarchy. Right, all of this has been let loose, and the founding generation has got to deal with that if they want any sense of governments. And so, the rebellion basically was the final argument, the Shays' rebellion, that is, to sway many of these leaders into favoring a stronger central government. Locally, the uprising had an effect on inducing the legislature not to impose a direct tax in 1787 and not to enact laws lowering court fees and exempting clothing, household goods, and tools of one's trade from the debt process. These were all the things the rebels had requested earlier in the summer of 1786. So our present-day Constitution overcame the major weakness of the Articles of Confederation, which demonstrated in the post-war economy, with an implementation of the principle of federalism and the establishment of enumerated powers which were reserved to the federal government. So anyway, the federal government is going to have a greater say over the states once the Constitution is constructed. To overcome the other weaknesses in the post-war economy, the present-day Constitution established 3 branches of government instead of 1 that existed under the Articles. These 3 branches of government provided a system of checks and balances and separation of powers which would protect the government and the people from the tyranny of a military dictator or a small group of power-hungry men, so goes the theory. This doctrine of checks and balances and separation of powers did not weaken the government by putting limits on it, but instead strengthened it by keeping it in situations when revolutionary overthrow might be possible. So like the Articles of Confederation, the first branch was a legislative department, which was provided for in Article 1 of the Constitution, and would consist of 2 houses. The Senate, basically every state got 2 senators, and the House of Representatives based on population, and we'll address that a little bit later. Again, like Congress under the Articles, the legislative branch could only make laws. It was not granted the ability to enforce them. Article 2 of the Constitution provided for the executive department or the president. The president could not make laws, but could only enforce the laws that Congress or the legislative branch passed. The addition of the branch of the government's structure overcame one of the major weaknesses of the Articles, as it gave the new Constitution the ability to enforce its laws. Who would have thunk, right? The third and the final branch was the judicial department, which was the establishment under the Article 3 of the Constitution, and served as the referee between the two other branches. It also provided for a check on the powers and provided a balance within the federal system. Since the judiciary settled all disputes over the meaning of the Constitution between the states and the federal government, as well as protected the rights of individuals within the states. Under the Constitution, all courts in America, state as well as federal, have the power in appropriate cases to declare legislative enactments unconstitutional. So that's one of the primary statutes of the Supreme Court. This principle of checks and balances was applied not only to the three branches of government, but also to the classes of society. The Founding Fathers were in essential agreement on the question of human nature and on the exercise of political power. It was acknowledged, quote, wealth tends to corrupt the mind, end quote, and that rich men as well as poor would use power to their own advantage if given the opportunity. Even though the need for a stronger centralized government was recognized, it was feared that the power might be misused if it were concentrated in the hands of few men. The founding generation assumed from the very beginning that although power was necessary, it was also dangerous. They tried to write a constitution that would ensure effective power for the government, but that would place reliable checks and safeguards on the use of that power. In one of the greatest statements ever written on the nature of government and the need for constraints on the government power, James Madison eloquently expressed the basic philosophy that guided the formation and the drafting of the Constitution. So, quote, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and, in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Right. So the great James Madison, 4th President of the United States, father of the Constitution, is basically reflecting on free will and human nature and the need for people to be governed, especially in a society that's dedicated to some degree of democratic principles. Human nature, Madison and others of his stature at this time believed, was universally fallible, and only built-in institutional safeguards could be counted on. Therefore, it was felt necessary to check the greed and pride of the rich, as well as the development of popular democracy. For the founding generation, democracy and liberty did not go hand in hand. Hence, it was feared that the time might come when a majority of Americans possessing no property of any kind could destroy, quote, the rights of property and of public liberty. All right. So they had a great fear of democracy at this time, and they felt there needed to be checks placed upon it. The Founding Fathers were reluctant to entrust power to special interests, as well as they were to entrust it to individual or social classes. They knew that a landed interest or a moneyed interest, a commercial interest, if it could seize full control of government, would dominate the rest of society. So James Madison argued a federal union of the states would lessen the possibility of tyranny because the most extensive the society, the less danger that some single group would be able to dominate it, and less probable it would be, quote, that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to evade the rights of other citizens, unquote. So the Constitution that finally emerged provided for a system of checks and balances in which all classes were to be represented. It embodied the separation of powers with mutual checks between the branches of the legislature, between the executive and the judiciary. To solve the problem of flexibility, the modern-day Constitution provides several solutions which make the document the longest living Constitution in the history of the modern world. These solutions are, from Article 5 of the Constitution, it provides for the amendments of the document, the Constitution. An amendment may be proposed in one of two ways. One, 2/3 of the state legislatures can petition Congress to summon a national constitutional convention for that purpose. Or two, the only method by which the Constitution has been amended thus far, Congress can submit amendments to the states. If 3/4 of the states ratify an amendment, it becomes part of the Constitution. Another source of the Constitution's flexibility is the delegates' use of several clauses whose meaning is vague and open to interpretation. Alexander Hamilton called these the implied powers of the Constitution. One of the open clauses of the Constitution is the famous, quote, elastic clause, which gives Congress power to make, quote, all laws which shall be necessary and proper to carry out its enumerated powers, an extremely broad grant of authority, if broadly construed. Another, quote, open clause is the general welfare clause, which gives Congress the power to provide for the general welfare, but does not say how broadly the general welfare is to be interpreted. The Constitution is an extremely brief document, and a very vague document, and it's basically the brevity, the briefness of it, and its vagueness has been generally subscribed to why it's been very successful. It's open to interpretation. Further flexibility emerged from the delegates' decision to say nothing at all of the Constitution about several important problems, even though they were discussed in the convention, and the assumption of state debts, for example, and the establishment of a national bank. A large majority of the framers were also opposed to universal male suffrage, but their attitude toward it was not portrayed in the Constitution. The silence of the Constitution on the important political issues, which would be the subjects of acute party conflict in the years to come, allowed the different political factions to support the document. The final weakness of the Articles of Confederation, its inability to protect individual rights, was overcome by our present-day Constitution with the 10 amendments to the document, which becomes later known as the Bill of Rights of the American People, which had its problems when it was first, when the Constitution is sent out to the states for ratification. It's one of the reasons why it's bounced back to Philadelphia is that it didn't have the Bill of Rights. So this is something that would later be put in. Anyway, this is concept 3. Forgive me, it's quite long. The Constitution is something that does require a lot of attention. So next we'll be looking at concept 4, which we'll discuss the major problems faced by the delegates and the principles of the Constitution. So we'll be taking a look at Concept 4 next time we meet. Take care.